Hey guys, I'm back with another video, and in this video we are going to see how to fetch data in Blazor interactive auto render mode. Okay, so for interactive server, we know everything is going to run on server, so we can directly access our data source, maybe database or file system, we can directly access those. And for WebAssembly, we know that all WebAssembly is going to be on the client side, so it does not have direct access to the server, but it can make API calls, HTTP calls to fetch the data or connect with some file system on the server, right? But for auto, it is not that straightforward. For interactive auto, it is a bit tricky actually, because whatever component we have, that is going to be first rendered using interactive server, using the SignalR connection to the server. And after that, once WebAssembly has been loaded in the background, and if we revisit that same page, so for the next widgets, for all the subsequent widgets, it is going to use that WebAssembly, not the SignalR connection. So what this mean is, for the first time, it is going to use SignalR. That means it can directly access the server resources, but for the subsequent widgets, it need to use HTTP calls. So now we somehow need to know that this current page, is it right now using interactivity, using server, using SignalR, or right now it is using WebAssembly for interactivity. Okay, so that's what we will see in this video. I have created a project. I named it Fetch Data Blazor Auto. I have not made any change into this. I created this authentication none and interactivity interactive auto. Okay, and per page per component basis interactivity. That's all what I did. So it created two projects. One is direct name and the second one is dot client. Okay, so that this dot client, this has one page. Inside this page is counter.razor. If I go to this, here we have this render mode interactive auto. So this page is using interactivity, using interactive auto. So that means first it will rely on SignalR for the first widget, and after that for all other widgets it will use WebAssembly. So let's first try to see, then we'll implement our data fetching. App is here. Let me open the developer tools. I'll go to network, clear everything, and console, clear everything. On network, I have selected WebSockets. So I'm going to click on this counter. So I clicked on this counter. And now if I go to network, okay, I ran it already. Okay, it already had this. Let's do this. Let's change the port. I just run it before starting recording. I just try to run it. Uh, let's do this. We'll go to properties, launch settings, and let's change the port. So we are using HTTPS, this one, HTTPS 7045. Let's make it 7046. Save and run. Okay, it is here. Again, network clear, console clear. If I go to counter now, WebSocket connected. If I go to network, we can see this. There is WebSocket which is right now pending 0 byte. That means it created a WebSocket connection. And if we go to console, it downloaded the WebAssembly. That means right now it is using SignalR interactivity using server right now. So if we press on this click me, so we can check here. I'll make it readable. So we have these all these messages. If I click on it, you see it sent one message and it receives the update. Can we see this? So all these are binary messages, but yeah, this is how it works. If I click on it again, counter, so it is using right now the SignalR to make the this component, this page interactive. Now if I move out of this page, okay, right now I moved back to home page. Now if I check this, so this WebSocket call, this is completed now. Time is 1.1 minute. So if this time is here, that means this WebSocket connection is completed. This is not open anymore. Okay. Now let's see if I go to this counter page again. I moved it, moved to this page. Right now there is no new signal connection and this is already closed. So right now it is using Blazor WebAssembly. So the same page but with two different modes. Now we will see how to fetch data in this component. So for this, let's do this. Let's create a new page. Inside this page is in client. So we'll say, let's say razor component and we will call it, let's say fetch data. Do we have fetch data in there? No, we don't, right? Okay. So now this data, it could come from anywhere. First thing we will say at the rate page and we'll say fetch data and we will add render mode interactive auto on this page. Okay, let's add this page to our nav bar. So in components, layout, nav menu, let's copy the last one and we'll say fetch data and we'll name it fetch data. Okay, now we can see this page, but now comes the point we need to get data. Now we have two approaches. First, some people prefer creating HTTP separate API layer for all those Blazor needs. But what I follow, if I'm using Blazor server and I am the one who is going to write the API layer, and then API layer is going to be hosted on the same server where my Blazor server application is going to be hosted. So for that, I ignore separate API layer. I usually do all those data related logic, data related stuff in the Blazor server project itself using services. So if tomorrow I need to add some API layer, maybe some for some other client, I'm creating some mobile application or some other UI client, I need to access the same data. I can simply introduce one API layer which is going to use the same business logic and data access layer which I have created in my Blazor server as a service layer. So that's how I approach things. But for this particular thing, this interactive auto, or we could say interactive WebAssembly, we cannot do this basically. We need to fetch data using HTTP API calls only. That's the only way by which we can get data from it. So yeah, I was saying that if I have a separate API layer, then there is no problem. We can directly maybe inject our HTTP client if we are using HTTP client, or we are using HTTP client factory, or if we are using some third party, for example, let's say maybe we are using Rapid client. So we can directly use this and directly make HTTP API call from here itself, because there is no point. We know that this is some third party server, third party API. We can directly call it from here. So it would not make any difference if we are making this call from Blazor server or Blazor WebAssembly. That means interactive server or interactive WebAssembly or interactive auto. We are good. But if we have the logic in the same project, let me on same server and everything is same. So in this case, inside this fetch data Blazor auto, I am going to introduce first thing. Let's do this. I'll create a service. So I'm going to create a folder called services, and here I'm going to create a class. Let's say some data service, something like this. Okay, and here I'm going to create a method public async task, and let's say a list of strings, and this we could say get data async, and we can return some data from here. So I'll simply say maybe I don't know, or maybe let's say integer array, and I'll name it get numbers async. This is just to demonstrate that some data is flowing through this. It could be some, maybe some, it is getting data from some maybe database or some third-party API or from file system. It could be anything. Okay. Now, but here what we'll do for the sake of simplicity, I'll simply say enumerable dot range, let's say 1 to 10. Yeah, and we can directly return this. This is enumerable range. So I'll say return dot to array, and we are good. Okay, some data service. Let's register this inside this program.cs now, because this service exists in the main project fetch data Blazor auto. We cannot register this inside this client project. Okay, now what, first let's try to register this. So here before builder.build, we'll say builder.services dot maybe a transient, and I'm directly registering this service. Now I can inject this service on the components pages which exists in this main project. So pages, I can inject this on home page, I can inject this on weather page, but I cannot inject this on client page. In client project, whatever pages I have, I cannot inject this there. Okay, that's because this service belongs to the main project, because whatever we have in client project, all that is going to ship to the client, going to be transferred to the client. So we cannot have our database related logic and all those things inside this client project. That is not going to work. So we need to have this service in the main project only. Now the problem is how our component, this fetch data component, can access to this some data service. So for this, the approach we could take in this client project, I'm going to introduce a new folder. Let's call it maybe services only. And here what I'll do, I'll say I'll create a new interface here. Okay, so I'll say I some data service. Okay, and I'll define that method here. So it should be task of integer array, and then get numbers missing. All right, what is the issue? Must declare a body. Oh, this is class. It should be interface. Okay, I have defined this interface. Now let's go to some data service. Let's use that interface here. So I'll use this, and the registration part in program.cs, I'll change this registration as well. Now I'll say that I some data service. Now we are registering this concrete service with this interface. Now we can use this interface at both the places. We can inject this ISM data service in the components which belongs to the main project. So that means pages, home page. Let's inject this here on the home page. I'll say inject ISM data service. Okay, let's say some data service, and here I can define our code block, and I can override on initialized. So this page home.razor, this page is statically server side rendered. So this page is SSR, so there is no interactivity, so we can directly use it here. So on initialized, we had that That was async method and we are not using async. Okay, that's fine. But so here override on initialized, override on initialized async. Okay, it is not working. Fine. Protected override async task on initialized async, and here we can have an integer array of, let's say, numbers, private, which is default, underscore numbers. Let's have a default value of empty array, and then in this on initialize async method we can get these numbers from await and some data service dot get numbers async. Now we have these underscore numbers, and here we can display these numbers. So I'll add h2 and I'll say numbers from data service, and here I can define an UL, and inside that I can make an for each var and in underscore numbers and li at the rate n. So it will display all these numbers. Let's first see if this interface service and is showing this data on this SSR page. If this is working, then we'll continue further. Okay, it's coming and we can see 1 to 10. These numbers are coming from there only. Cool. Numbers. All right. Now let's try the same thing on that interactive page. So that page, we have this page is fetch data.razor page. Let's inject the same some data service interface now. We have this interface inside this project only. So we'll say same thing, some data service, and let's copy this thing, this h2 ulli and this code block on fetch data page. I'm using the same thing. We have defined this method on this interface, so it should work. So compile time, we don't have any error. Let's run it and let's see what we got. Okay, it came. If I go to fetch data, I have data 1 to 10. Then I have some error. If I go there, come back. Okay, let's see what that error was. If you see, one or more errors occurred, cannot provide a value for property some data service on type this because there is no registered service of type I some data service. But that is not right. We already registered it. You saw that, right? Let's clean it, go to home page, and let's restart this. I am on home page, everything works fine. I'll go to fetch data page. We have everything, and after that we have this error again. Again it is saying the same thing, that there is no registered service of type ISOM data service, but we have that service and we can see the data here. So the point here is, the problem is when, so initially it runs on server using InteractiveServer using SignalR connection. In that case, it goes to the main project and we have that defined in the main project in this program.cs, right? So it has that access to that service, it fetches data, we got data. After that, WebAssembly got loaded, and then when WebAssembly kicks in, it checks that component, this fetch data, and then it checks this. We are injecting ISOM data service, but for this interface there is nothing registered for this service. It has its own program.cs file. So here we need to register some service for that in here. So using this, we'll be able to use this. Now the problem comes, builder.services. We could say add transient. We have ISOM data service, but we do not have that some data service. because that service belongs to the main project. One approach could be we can move this some data service to this client project, but that is not the correct way. Region this some data service can use database to fetch the data, and that cannot be used from client project. So now we are here. Now somehow we need to tell this that if you are here, if you are running just WebAssembly, just do this. Try to this ISOM data service. You need to use HTTP API call to fetch the data from this service. Okay. Now how can we achieve this? For this, what we'll do, I'm showing you a simple HTTP client approach, basic raw HTTP client approach. You can use maybe Refit. I already showed you in one of my project how to use Refit, or you can use maybe HTTP client factory if you want. So the approach, or maybe if you are using some maybe REST sharp or some other library to make HTTP calls, that is also fine. Okay. So in this services, what I'll do, I'll create a new class. And here I'll say, let's say some data API service or service API. API service, something like this. The name is up to you. Or maybe we could say proxy service, some data proxy service, something like this, or some data service proxy. The name is up to you. Okay. Here, this class, this will also implement the same interface, ISOM data service. We'll implement this interface. We are here. Okay, now we need to get data from the same service, which was that some data service, which actually has the actual logic to fetch data. So for that, we are making an HTTP call. That means we need to have some maybe minimal API, or we need to have some controller. Okay, let me show you minimal API approach. So in the main project in program.cs, what I'll do, I'll define a minimal API endpoint here. So I'll say app dot map get, and let's say fetch data. The names are now the Razor page name and API name, these are same, so we should not do this. So let's say API slash fetch data. Okay, and here we can define our handler. So here I'll say I want you to inject some data service, this. So let's say service, and from here I want you to return, let's say typed results dot okay, and await service dot get numbers assigned. Okay, so this thing, this API, this is using the same service. We are injecting it and we are calling this method, which is in turn calling the same thing, same database logic or same business logic, service logic, whatever you call it, it is using the same. So our some data service which we can directly inject for that page if we are on interactive server mode, and if we are on interactive WebAssembly, we are going to use the same service but via this API. So API fetch data. Okay, now what we'll do, inside this some data proxy service. Okay, here we'll create a HTTP client, new HTTP client, or maybe we can directly register this HTTP client in the program.cs. So what we'll do in program.cs, we will say builder.services.add transient or scoped, we could use anything. And here we'll say the service provider, it should use, we will return a new HTTP client from here with base address defined as new URI, and we can access the current domain using builder.hostenvironment.base address. Yes, using this thing. Now we have registered this HTTP client. Now we can inject this HTTP client directly in our service proxy class, this one. So here we'll say let's use the constructor. We'll directly inject HTTP client, and now we can use this HTTP client to get the data. So we'll say var numbers equals await HTTP client dot get from JSON async, and the return type is going to be integer array, and then the request URI, and that is going to be, we know, API slash fetch data, right? It was this API slash fetch hyphen data, correct. Now we'll have these numbers and we'll return these numbers. All right. So now this proxy service is ready. We can register this proxy service in here. So for ISOM data service, just use this service. Okay. So let's revisit this. We have ISOM data service with this sum data service, which is actually going to fetch the data from database. This is defined in the main project. Okay. And the registration in the DI in main project, we are doing this. For this interface which is defined in client project, we are registering this service with this. So when our page which has interactive auto mode, this is running for the first time, that means it is using interactivity using server, using the SignalR connection. That means the logic is going to be executed on the server. In that case, it is going to use this ISOM data service. The implementation it will get from this main program.cs, the main projects. It will use this sum data service, and from the sum data service, it will get the actual data from database. Now, when the flow goes to WebAssembly on this interactive auto page, in this case, it will check the implementation of this ISOM data service in the client's program.cs file. And in clients program.cs, we say that ISOM data service, you should check the implementation in some data proxy service. And inside this service, we are making an HTTP call to our same main project. We have defined an endpoint here using minimal API. It could be controller action. There is no problem with this. And from this API, we are getting data from the same server, same service. All right. So this is the complete flow. Now let's check it. And for this, we can add some console lines as well. So I'll say console.write line main project some data service get number session, get number session, so that we can see that what is happening here. We could add breakpoints as well, but I'm just adding these methods here. Then I'll add this method in some data proxy service here. So here I'll say client project some data service proxy get number session. Okay. Now let's run this and let's see what we got. For client's log, we will use the browser's console window, and for server's log, we can use the command prompt it opens. So right now we have this thing. If we open this, we have this here, which is saying main project some data service get number async, because we got this data on the home page, which is using which is statically rendered on server using Blazor SSR. So this is on server side only. Now if I go to fetch data, you see we got main project some data service get number async. This first call, this is from server. And now if I check this, if I'll do inspect and I'll go to console, you see it said get client project some data service proxy service. It started from here, and then the second call came after this. So now we do not have any error and we have the actual data, right? So that is how we can fetch data in Blazor uh, interactive auto mode. So our complete logic, database access, everything is going to be at one single place, which will be in main project using some services. And then we can use that same service. We will define an interface which will be in client project, and the direct implementation will be this data service, which the interactive auto, when it is running for the first time using SignalR connection using InteractiveServer, it will use this. And when it is using WebAssembly from interactive mode, then we will define one service in the client project only, which will make HTTP call to the same service. All right. So it sounds complicated, but it is not. If we are using the goodness of this auto mode, then we at least we can do this thing, right? You can get rid of all these thing if you have used some third party HTTP client. Okay, for example, Refit. I really like Refit, REFIT. If we could have used that, then there is no point of creating all these. We should have just defined an interface and we could have get the data from here directly. Okay. All right. So, and if you want me to create the same video using Refit client, do let me know in the comment. I can plan a video and I can create that video and I'll share with you guys. And this source code which I have used in this project, you can get it for free from my description. I'll add a link in the description. Please check the source code. If you want, just get it for free. All right, so that's all for this video. Do let me know in the comment if you already knew that you can do this, or did you like this approach, or you have some other approach to tackle the same thing, fetching data using interactive auto mode. If you have some different approach, do let me know in the comment. I would love to see the different approaches. This is what I am using and which makes sense to me, and I'm open to other alternative solutions as well. All right, so that's all for this video. Please like this video, share this video, subscribe my channel. I'll be back soon with some other video. Till then, bye bye. Happy coding.